I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. On today's show, we are going to preview the USMNT's upcoming friendlies against Panama this Saturday night in Austin, Texas, and against Mexico the following Tuesday in Guadalajara. These friendlies will be the first matches for the U.S. under new head coach Mauricio Pochettino. To help me today, I've invited Brian Sciaretta to join the show. Brian is a writer at American Soccer Now. His work also appears in various newspapers across the country, and he's a frequent guest on Talk Sport and Sirius XM. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, Frank. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you on again. And so Pochettino named his 25-man roster last week. Since then, there's been a few changes. Fuller and Balogun, Johnny Cardoso, and Tim Weah have all withdrawn due to injuries. Tanner Tessman, Brandon Vasquez, and Alex Zendejas have taken their place. But when you take a look at this roster that Pochettino put together, what's your biggest takeaway, or what stands out to you the most?
Well, I think what was interesting is that he didn't want to make any cuts from the September roster until he actually got to meet people. I think the only players who are not involved with this team that were involved in September are not here because of injury. And there's plenty of reasons, where a couple players might not deserve to be here. But I think he wanted to say, bring them all back. We'll add some people in when there's some injuries. And then I'm going to take the status quo from the team, and then a couple obvious additions, guys who like Weston McKennie, and who rejoins the team. He wasn't there in September, but I just don't think he wanted to cut anybody or leave anybody out until he met with them and got a chance to see them for himself.
I was a little surprised by that myself, actually, and I don't know if I want to say I was disappointed, but I think I was hoping to maybe learn a little bit more about who Pochettino values, and maybe see him make his mark, on the roster. And it did kind of seem like, he just brought in the same people that, Mikey Barnes would have brought in.
Yeah, I think there's some reasons for that. And I think when you see a big emphasis was that he says he didn't talk to anybody before the start of this camp. He didn't have one-on-one conversations with people before camp. I think he wants this camp to be all players to kind of arrive on equal footing and to not make any judgments until he sees them. And if there were changes, they were more like, I know a couple questions about the current pool, but no one was really called up for the first time ever. Any of the additions were all people who've been with the team for at least one major tournament, if it's not the World Cup. So, I think he wants to make his own he'll make his own statement. But look, and I said this before under Greg, and I've said this before under every U.S. national team head coach, us in the media and the pundits and the fans get really excited over who the marginal players are, who's that outsider who gets in on the team. And, but more likely than not, success of this team will always come down to, and any team will come down to how well the top group plays. Like, Christian Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Anthony Robinson, those level of players. And then, obviously we don't know who the starting forwards are and stuff like that. But this team, it doesn't matter one iota whether or not Paxton Aronson gets a surprise call up unless the best players are playing well. So, and I think Pochettino knows that he has to get the big players firing on all cylinders for any of the outsiders or for potential newcomers in the future to really matter. He doesn't want to have, my guess, this is all my guess here until he really starts digging into it, but he doesn't want to send the young players into a team that's not functioning well. He wants to send the new players coming into a team that he has up and running and going, moving forward smoothly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so with this being Pochettino's first matches in charge, what are you most excited to see when the team actually takes the field, or what are you most curious to see when they take the field?
Well, I think it's twofold. It's a little bit what I just touched on. Like, are the top guys playing well? I mean, you saw that at the Copa America. Like, Weston McKennie did not have a good Copa America. I thought he was actually very poor. And he's got a talent to be like, a Champions League caliber player. He hasn't always been consistent. I've seen this isn't the first time he played poorly for the national team. I remember when World Cup qualifying started for Qatar, the first couple of matches. I remember the one time we went down to El Salvador, he was very poor. But it's getting all these top guys to be playing well. And then after that, there's some questions where we don't know. We know who the wing. We know Christian Pulisic's a starter. We know Weston's a starter. We know Anthony Robbins is a starter. But then, what are the center back pairings? What is he seeing in training? Who is the starting forward? I know Balogun's not there, but how does Sargent compare with Pepe? And if Balogun was here, how would he rate those three? And some things where things are not clear and obvious, how does he view those things? So, that's kind of how I see it. And obviously goalkeeping. Horvath and Turner have a lot of questions. Schulte's playing well. I think, he's put himself in a good position, and Steffen's back. So yeah, there's no more than the obvious with a new coach. It's not the marginal decision; it's the very basic ones. It makes for boring chatter, but he's got to worry about a couple of the most obvious things that fans are talking about, not anything hidden that only I see or only experts or pundits see. We're not at that level right now.
Yeah, I like you brought up Wes McKennie, though, because, he's a guy that when I watch him play for Juve, I know it took him a while to get going, this season, but now he's playing and starting, most of their matches. When you watch a Juve game, he's everywhere. I mean, he throughout the entire game, you see him when they're in possession, not in possession, the guy's everywhere. But it just seemed for a while, you mentioned the Copa America, but even a good part of the year, it just seems like when I watch a USMNT game, he's nowhere. I forget he's even on the field sometimes. I mean,
and he's losing his duels, Yeah. It's like when a 50-50 ball comes in, he's on the wrong end of it.
So what do you think that is? Why do you think that's happening?
I don't know. It's part of it's, some people's questions is physical fitness. I don't know. I don't know sometimes if mental. Look, everyone's going to have a bad game. Weston included. You have to excuse that. But the Copa America was a bad stretch. It wasn't. Like I remember. Like I said, that one El Salvador game when they went in World Cup qualifier, he went down there and got manhandled by Alex Roldan, of all people, who just had a better game than him. But in the Copa, it was just one game after another. I know he had that goal called back, but it's a concern, and it's one of those things where you need to see him consistent. Like I said, Pulisic shows up for every game. It's remarkable to see. Now, when he does have a bad game, it's amazing how he only limits it to friendlies, and sometimes minor friendlies that no one cares about. But McKennie, I don't know. It's a bit of a concern, but that's a thing that Pochettino has to worry about. And are there consequences if he doesn't play well for an extended period of time? How willing is he going to be to bench some players? When they don't have a game and move on from a preferred core. So we'll see. That's a question that's over time. We'll see how Pochettino deals with that. Not in these games.
Yeah. Hopefully he can get him going. Hopefully he can get McKennie going. You mentioned some of these starting lineup decisions that Pochettino has to make. And I know it's kind of difficult to predict which way he's going to go, but let me ask you which way you'd like to see him go on some of these. And the first one is goalkeeper, which seems wide open to me. I mean, who would you like to be the starting goalkeeper when they take the field?
I'm partial to Schulte. I've seen him. He certainly made some mistakes. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and argue, but they all have. I've seen Horvath, Turner, Steffen, and every single one of the people in the pool. Drake, even though he's not there, I've seen all of them make mistakes. So, but I've seen some big game performances in him too, whether it be, the CONCACAF run from Columbus, some Olympic saves I've seen him make. And, I like where he is as a player, and I like to see him come as an outsider to put pressure on these other three that have been there for so long. So, I think you gotta, I like the idea of rewarding a guy who's just been winning, playing and winning. I think that's he has a bright future.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe Pochettino will give one guy a start against Panama, one guy against Mexico.
Yeah, that's how I kind of think things will be. I don't think he's going to play all 180 minutes.
I'd love to see Schulte get the start against Mexico. I mean, he's already proven in CONCACAF Champions Cup he can go down there, play on Mexican soil in a tough environment, and play really well. So,
yeah, and he had a bad mistake in that one game, and he came right back against Tigres and came right back and won it in the shootout. So, you saw the worst and then the best of them in one game, which was, which, hey, you don't want to excuse the mistake, but I like how he put it behind him and made some more big saves after that, real quickly. He didn't just get rattled. I mean, it was good to see.
Right. What about center back? So Chris Richards is out. I think he's probably the one guy you would say is going to be in there no matter what, normally. With him out, which two would you like to see in there?
Yeah, I think Richards always gets called up. I'm not sure if he always starts if he's not playing well. I mean, I don't have as many untouchables my opinion, as lock starters. To me, there's only two lock starters on this team: Pulisic and Anthony Robinson. I think even McKennie, because of inconsistencies, he's the next most likely to start. But really, two guys, if healthy, have to start, and that's Robinson and Anthony Robinson and Christian Pulisic. So I just want to make that clear. So after that, I think there's a couple different ways to look at this. It's Ream is what he is. He's going to be 37 very soon. Even if he's at the top of his game, what is it wise to use these learning experiences on someone of that age? I kind of wonder that. So I kind of think that Mackenzie Miles is pretty interesting, because I think that while those two guys, again, everyone's error prone on this team, too many mistakes. There's a little bit more athleticism with that group, with that pairing. I think Trusty is, I don't know. I still need to see more, based on like what he does week in, week out with, he's in an environment now where, he had 120 touches against, for the in the Celtic win over the weekend, but that's just a different kind of soccer when Celtic is just dominating non-Old Firm, or even in this case Aberdeen opponents. It's just a mismatch. So he's not tested defensively, and then when you see what happens when they have to get tested when they go to Germany, it's ugly. I think Miles and Mackenzie are the ones I would want to see. I would like to see that pairing together.
Okay, this next one is probably the one I'm most interested to see when it comes out. Maybe this one a goalkeeper, and that's right back. So Joe Scally or Marlon Fossey. It's been Joe Scally filling in for Dest for quite a while now. Marlon Fossey, I thought, played pretty well against New Zealand. Seems to have more of an attacking prowess than Scally. I mean, which one of those two would you like to see get the start?
I think you got to give both of them time in this game. Maybe start one, and then the other in another game. I think Scally's probably going to be the better bet in Mexico, especially with the center back coverage. I mean, if Miles is behind him, if you're going with a new center back pairing, Fossey booming up the right side is kind of leaves a hole there, I think. I'm not convinced Marlon Fossey's too far ahead of Brian Reynolds in the same league, to be honest with you. I think Brian's a little younger, but their numbers I look at, they're not too too dissimilar. So I don't necessarily know how that, if Fossey's going to be always involved or Brian's going to overtake him. I think Scally's still pretty good shape to even be the backup maybe. I mean, even when he was struggling last season with Mönchengladbach, I only thought he was poor against Jamaica in the Nations League semifinal when he didn't have a good game. But I thought if there's one player who performed well at the Copa America, and there wasn't many, like Scally would be on that short list. I thought he was the least of their problems. So, I think he deserves to be there.
Yeah, I also thought he put in a pretty admirable performance during the Copa America. He definitely, like you said, was not the problem whatsoever. Yeah. The other one that's maybe even more interesting now is central forward, since Balogun's not going to be there. That seems to kind of open it up a little bit. Who do you favor getting the nod there?
I've always been partial to Josh when he's 100%, and even when he's been called up, he just hasn't been at 100%. He's been dealing with an ankle injury, and we haven't really seen him since at a good, at a healthy level, really, since the World Cup. His ankle's been off and on, and really struggled to get healthy. I'm curious. I mean, I think he's more consistent than maybe not as explosive, but close, but not as explosive as Balogun. But I think he's a little more consistent. When everyone's healthy, I'm always kind of partial to him starting over Balogun. Not everyone shares that opinion, but I like Josh. I like how he reads the game, and he doesn't need as many opportunities as Balogun to score historically. Balogun takes like 6 shots a game, gets a goal. Josh doesn't need that. A little more of a threat in the air too. So I like that, and I've always thought Brandon should have gotten. Berhalter didn't really like him. It seemed like that to me. I've always I always thought Brandon should have gotten more of a look than he did. And I'm happy he's called in, and I don't think he should be as far off from the list as everyone else is, and further behind him, Duncan, Maguire, but these 4 are good, including Balogun, but I would think Brandon's going to get a look. I mean, I think the motivation for him to play in Guadalajara against Mexico would be enormous. And it would really kind of maybe show the U.S. too that, here you had a guy who actually had a real choice to make. It wasn't just like a myth, like a hypothetical, like Mexico really wanted him and he chose the U.S. So I like guys like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that Vasquez is getting an opportunity as well. He brings you something different, as a striker, different profile, than the other guys. Let's talk about the opponents, Panama and Mexico. So even though the U.S., they've lost 3 of their last 4, to Panama. Some of those come with, asterisks. There was the Weah red card at the Copa America. There was the last Gold Cup where they played them with their B team. But even with them, losing the last 3 or 4, I still feel like the U.S. should be expected to win, and it's not going to be, a huge result if they do. I mean, do they have? How much value do you see in this Panama game? If they get a result, does it really mean anything?
Well, you want to see a new coach bump, and it becomes problematic if they don't, because whenever the team was losing, I'm sorry, it was, let's blame Greg. Sometimes I thought that was warranted, and sometimes I didn't. But now the players have nowhere to hide. No one's going to be running out there blaming Pochettino. At least he's going to have a real long honeymoon. And if things don't go well off the bat, the players are going to get the heat in a way that they haven't before. And I think that for everyone involved, if they don't get a win, like, you don't want the players to get this line of heat, because it's that can make a problem harder to correct for Pochettino than not. So we'll see. I think they're going to beat Panama. Going to Mexico is still always a challenge, and I think Mexico's going to be just as motivated, if not more so, than the U.S. team. Part of the problem with the U.S. team over the past, since the World Cup, has been complacency, and it's been stale. And if they can't shake that off with the new coach, especially a renowned coach, it's going to be tough to fix. So, I think that they kind of understand it.
Yeah, they've only beaten Mexico on Mexican soil once ever. Yeah. So, I mean, if they go down there and get a win, is that a huge statement result for Pochettino and the team?
Yeah, I think it's going to get everyone really excited. The first time they did it got everyone excited, and really kept the Jurgen Klinsmann train going a little bit longer than it should have. But I think I think especially if they win both these games, everyone's going to be totally amped and wanting to be part of this thing. So, but we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how the team starts communicating with each other too. Because they talk about this whole experience. So I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I think I like the idea of a clean slate. I kind of like the idea he only spoke to Anthony Robinson, and that happened by accident before this camp started.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too. It's going to be real curious to see, just watch the press conferences, the media this week, just to see how everybody's talking, interacting together, for the first time. That's going to be real interesting. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is at Brian Sciaretta, and also to your work at American Soccer Now. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks. Anytime. Let me know when you ever want me back.
Oh, okay. I will definitely do that. I always love having you. And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at Frank Garza 007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.